Colleagues, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending where you are. It's a pleasure to have all of you here today in this panel discussion about how to translate legislative procedures into a digital dynamics. And it's my absolute pleasure to be your moderator today. My name, for those of you that are not familiar, is Luís Kimaid. I'm the Executive Director of Bússola Tech. We are a global think tank or research center, whichever nomenclature you prefer, that research and promotes dialogues about parliamentary modernization, both at the national and subnational level. And I have my absolute pleasure to welcome here today esteemed friends and colleagues for this discussion, starting with Klaus Koggel, the Director General at the Bundesrat of Germany, Marty Bickford, the Vice President at Xcential Legislative Technologies, Paulo Dantas, the Chief Legislative Counsel at the Senate of Brazil, and Warren Burke at the U.S. House of Representatives. Today, I'm going to prepare a few questions, and I will invite all of you to comment your thoughts on these questions in around 4 or 5 minutes each, so we can have a conversation. Before we start, I'd like to yield the floor very briefly to each one of you for you to introduce yourself for the colleagues watching us here today. If you permit me, I'll do this alphabetically. Klaus, would you like to introduce yourself to the colleagues?
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, my name is Klaus Koggel. I'm working for the German Bundesrat. The Bundesrat is the second legislative organ in Germany alongside the Bundestag. So we are a bicameral parliamentary system, and I'm responsible for the Parliamentary Directorate General. Before joining the Bundesrat, I'm a trained lawyer. So I worked as a judge at the Administrative Court of Koblenz, a city in the state of Rhineland-Palatinate. But now I'm working for the Bundesrat for 27 years now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Klaus, for your introduction. Marty, would you like to introduce yourself for the colleagues as well?
Hello, my name is Marty Bickford. I'm an executive here at Xcential. Xcential builds legislative and regulatory drafting systems. My career, my background is here in Silicon Valley, working in startups since the early 90s. My focus has always been on emerging technologies, open standards, and have been working in the legislative space for the last several years. So it is a thrill to be on such a esteemed panel. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Marty. Paulo, would you like to introduce yourself for the colleagues as well?
Yes. Hi, my name is Paulo Dantas. I've been working at the Brazilian Senate for just over 11 years, but my career in the Brazilian public service lasts for more than 18 years. Most of them focus on tax and fiscal matters. My background is electronic engineering, and I later pursued a degree in law. So I have a certain familiarity with the digital systems. I became the chief of the Legislative Council at the Brazilian Senate in March 25, so it's very recent. Since then, a significant part of my work has involved engaging with digital transformation of the legislative process, both through initiatives of the Legislative Council and others projects involving other areas of Brazilian Senate. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much, Paulo. Warren, would you like to introduce yourself to the colleagues as well? Warren, I think you need to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Luís. My name is Warren Burke, and I am an attorney and legislative drafter by training. I started in the Office of Legislative Counsel of the U.S. House of Representatives in 1999, and most of the time since then, meaning the first 24, 25 years, I specialized as a drafter primarily in public health issues. But then in November of 2024, I was appointed to serve as the head of the office. So I've switched to that role now, which is primarily an administrative role, and I've been doing that for about a year now. It's been a steep learning curve and a great experience so far.
Thank you very much, Warren, for your introduction as well. It's a pleasure to have all of you here today. Klaus, allow me to bring my first question to you. Just as a context for colleagues in this panel today, we know that when we talk about digital transformation in any sector, we're talking about enhancing specific process and procedures using digital tools, not only replicating them. But when we talk about parliaments, we are talking about decades or even centuries old traditions that are written in the rules and sometimes even in unwritten rules between the members and the institution and the society in general. So that's the challenge that we are trying to tackle in today's panel. And that's in the context that I bring my first question to you. And I recognize that this may seem as a very basic question, but in practice, we see notable differences amongst different parliaments, even sometimes in the same country, in case of bicameral systems. So my question to you is, when we talk about building a digital legislative process, we are essentially translating procedural traditions into structured, programmable logic, and this is going to be replicated in the day-to-day of the institution. So from your perspective, what principles or values must never be lost in this translation from procedural to the digital form? Klaus, I think you're muted.
So thank you for Luís for giving me the floor first. Yes, in my introduction, I said I'm a trained lawyer, and for me as a lawyer, the most important thing is the respect of the legal framework. So the legal framework is constituted by the Constitution, by the rules of procedures, by unwritten parliamentary practice, parliamentary procedures, and these must be preserved. These traditions, this legal framework varies in every country. It even varies in parliamentary systems, especially in bicameral systems. You have different traditions in each chamber. And but these traditions, this legal framework, this determines not only the heart of the parliamentary system, but the heart of the democracy. And therefore, it should be respected in any case. The second point is what must be preserved is the principle of debate and discussion, because the legislative process is based on these two things, debate and discussion. And also the search for compromise, and which is especially true for bicameral parliaments. From my experience, I can say in Germany, the bicameral system, the Bundestag and the Bundesrat, if both chambers cannot agree about the contents of a bill, they have to discuss. And for that, we even have a special committee, which is called the Mediation Committee, looking for compromise if both houses cannot agree about the contents of a bill. And so this is one of the traditions in Germany which cannot be lost. So even if workflows are digitized, debate, discussion cannot be digitized. So that's very important to me. A third point to me is transparency. If the legislative process goes digital, it has to remain transparent and explainable, not only to lawmakers and parliamentary staff, but also to the citizens. Because you all know, parliaments have often been criticized recently for being a kind of black box, or even I read a comment saying parliaments are the dark room of legislation. And so citizens are quite critical about it. And so if parliaments lose that transparency, and this might be the case when you're going digital with the legislative process, so this transparency has to be maintained, because otherwise citizens will lose the confidence in our parliamentary and democratic system. Another point for me is accountability. So there must still be human responsibility. There must be the possibility of correcting mistakes, of revising decisions, and not surrendering to the digital system. And linked to this is the principle of control of the system, which must be maintained. Control by parliaments themselves, that is to say, parliamentarians, parliamentary staff. Because when you develop digital solutions, most parliaments are not capable, do not have the skills, the know-how, or the human resources to do it on their own. So they have to rely on external expertise, on external companies, or on their IT teams. And so if you want to remain in control, it means that you do not surrender your control to these experts, to these external companies, and to IT systems. So these are for me the most important traditions which have to be preserved if we go digital with the legislative process. And the most important thing is that we have to maintain the human factor in the legislative process, even if we're going digital. So these were my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Klaus, for your opening considerations on this topic. Allow me to invite you, Paulo, to make your comments on this as well.
Okay. I completely agree with Klaus in his considerations. We always should keep in mind that a parliamentary procedure, a legislative process, it's a means to an end. The end is to realize the constitutional values, constitutional principles. So when we translate the legislative procedure to digital forms, we must avoid that they will not create undesirable consequences. So some principles we should keep in mind to achieve that. So some of them the Klaus has already mentioned, but I'd like to indicate some of them, like the constitutional roles of the majority and minority, the roles of the committees and the plenary, the separation between them, the roles of leadership, and here in Brazil we have some examples when we develop some projects to do this transformation. We have to take care of these principles. We have developed a very useful amendment editor, LexEdit, that uses a markup language that defines the structure, format, and relationship between the parts of the bill. And even though it was a joint project between the Câmara dos Deputados and the Senado Federal, it was not adopted by the Câmara, by the House of Representatives, because they could not assure that each one of the 513 representative members could operate the new system. So we adopted in Senado, but not in Câmara dos Deputados. Another principle is the transparency that Klaus has already mentioned. It's but not only a transparency, but it has to assure the intelligibility of the information that is available. In Câmara dos Deputados, the House of Representatives here in Brazil, they have created a simplified version of the Bill's Progress website to make easier to ordinary citizens to understand the process. The legislative process is kind of complex for people who are not used to work with it. So they have this worry about creating a simplified version. When you access the website, you can choose which version you want to access, the simplified or the full process. And the simplified version is much easier for people to understand. Third principle, it's very, very important, and Klaus has already mentioned it, the deliberation as a human and political act. the parliamentary procedure should always protect time and space for reflection, debate, negotiation, persuasion. This kind of flexibility, you have to assure that there will be this kind of time and space. And finally, any digital transformation should reinforce trust between among members, between House of Parliament, between the servants, the public servants that work with this, the officers, and between Parliament and society. So we should not digitize the process at the expense of democratic values. This trade-off we should never accept. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paulo, for your considerations on this topic as well. Warren, can I invite you to share your thoughts as well?
Yes, thanks, Luis. I would say, first off, that digital technology is a marvel, an absolute marvel, the way that it contributes to speed, efficiency, volume, but long-standing legislative systems and procedures are also a marvel, even if sometimes they reflect the exact opposite: slowness, inefficiency, low volume. How do we reconcile the two? I think you're starting with exactly the right question. What are the principles and values that we don't want lost in the process? And one way to identify those, I think, maybe is to look backwards over the technological changes we've had so far and think, well, what stayed the same and what's been allowed to change? Because probably the things that stay the same are the things with a strong tie to the principles and values, which should not be lost. Let me give an example from the perspective of a legislative drafter. If we went back to the 1980s, all of the bills were drafted using typewriters, and we used cutting and pasting, meaning our clerks would literally take a long pair of scissors and cut piece of paper, and they would glue changes on top of the text, which would then be sent off to the government printing office, and the next version of a draft would take about a week. So a client would would accumulate changes and would request a new version very deliberatively, very carefully, because they knew there was going to be a week delay. Now, things are zipping around by word processing, email, PDFs. Things have changed a lot. But you could argue, speed, efficiency, effectiveness, volume, those sorts of things, all great. But you can argue there's something that can be lost too, that we as legislative drafters need to push back for. There was a value to the next draft taking a week. There was a value to sleeping on it, to slowing down, to thinking about it. There was a value to slowness. Similarly with PDFs, when we switched to composing PDFs, there was a senior attorney in my office who argued against it. He didn't want us to use PDFs. He said he wanted the drafts to remain messy. They should be deliberately messy, because that way the clients would focus on the substance of the words and not the polished formatting. And he wasn't wrong. So, those are the type things that we as drafters need to keep in the back of our minds and need to push back on the technology to make sure it's preserved. Taking a more macro view, what is a legislature? What is the principle or value served by legislatures generally? It's bringing people together to solve problems that are sometimes very complex, difficult, intractable, historical, sometimes even irrational problems. It's not a math equation, it's a people equation. And legislatures have proved to be the solution to that over human history. And there's a reason to that. So the values that I would not want to see lost are the values of deliberation and understanding, consensus, compromise, which are all founded on human relationships, right? Facilitated by technology, but ultimately it's a human transaction.
Thank you very much, Warren, for your very interesting thoughts on this as well. I'd like to invite Marty to share his comments. But Marty, before I give you the floor, I will frame it a little bit to your expertise, which is a technological expertise. So designing these systems that reflect, as Claus, Paulo, and Warren were sharing, often means engaging with values that have evolved over centuries in such a rare intersection between technology and legislative procedure, where structured knowledge is still limited. We got to say this. How can those developing these tools understand and embed these long-standing institutional traditions and nuances into an actual digital design? How can you explain to your developer how to embed those principles in such a platform? Feel free to share, of course, if you have any examples that if you want to illustrate this.
Okay, first of all, thank you for focusing on my area of expertise because my teenagers were making fun of me last night when they realized who else was on this panel and were questioning what value I would bring at all. And I've already learned a little bit, so I appreciate this. And as a vendor, I would say the most important thing is to have a chef, have a partner who understands how all the ingredients work, can make new recipes, but is really an insider within the legislature. Tech companies are not experts in legislation. I have learned just a ton of things over the last 3 years that I didn't know, and I'm a decent cook, but I'm not a chef. A chef is someone who can put recipes together, understands why the different components matter to one another, and you need that partner on the inside who's a member of the legislature to guide the whole process. It is not enough to do this through specifications. They need to be involved in the project. They need to be an owner of the outcome of the project from day one. I would also say that, and this might sound counter to the question, but I think it's still important to start with a blank piece of paper and to start with to erase the whiteboard and go back to first principles. Because the things that we know, the pain points that we run into on a daily basis, those can cloud the things that are most important to focus on. So you always want to start, and this is true of in tech, whenever we think about innovation and building value, we always want to start with a blank piece of paper and go back to first principles. And those first principles in this instance, these gentlemen have already listed some important ones, but the example of transparency, I would argue that may be one of the most important. In a system that we would want to implement, we want to focus on precision and automation. I would argue that efficiency is not important, to agree with Warren, but if we're going to do some automations, which we certainly should, what is being automated should be exposed. It should all be very clear and readable by humans. Nothing should be hidden in the source code. So we want to document those first principles. What is this system going to create value around? What can't we lose? Then we move on to pain points, like we can't collaborate on large documents in real time together. That's not necessarily a value or a principle, but is a pain point from the users. And for a system to be successful, we have to address the pain points of users. That is really the whole point of building new systems. Once we get our pain points done, then we start mapping out all the jobs to be done, right? And we keep going back to our first principles to make sure that every step of the way is promoting the principles, not degrading them. So we need to understand how data moves in and out of the systems, at what points, who does what, what's changing at what points, what's important, what's okay to automate, what needs to be left without automation for human collaboration. And then I'll just say the last two things I think are really important, which is no system works unless you have a high focus on UX. Users have to love a system for it to work. No matter how perfectly it's designed and how well we take care of our data and how efficient it is, if the users don't love it, if they can't engage in it, if they resist, it will fail. So we have to engage with all of the users early and understand what they're trying to accomplish and how to set them up for success. And then the last point I'll make is about the data integrity. You want your data to, in a system, the data interoperates with each other. It interoperates out of the system and comes back. And you need your data to survive not only the system that you're building today, it needs to absolutely outlast all of the vendors that participate in that system. So focus on data integrity and UX, and have that partner, and vendors will be set up for success.
Thank you very much, Marty, for your considerations on this topic as well. And Warren, allow me to bring my next question to you, if I may. As we have been discussing, and all of you have shared, parliamentary procedures, they are rooted in time-honored traditions, and they often operate in something that I like to call legacy practices. And colleagues from IT, I'm making a parallel with legacy systems in our parliaments. And these legacy practices, as I call them, they have been in place in the institution for generations. My point being, beyond the written rules and procedures, every parliamentary institution, every parliament relies on long-standing unwritten conventions that shape how the legislative process actually works. These practices that have been built through years of consensus and trust, and any attempt to redefine or even digitize them can raise concern about trust, about balancing, even about legitimacy. So my question to you is, before even selecting a digital solution or the priorities, how can the institutions approach these deeply rooted conventions in a way that preserves both confidence and continuity in the process? And of course, if you have any examples that you want to share, please feel free to do it. Warren?
Thank you. The House of Representatives the U.S. House has a lot of rules. I mean, if you were to look at the rules and the precedents and the Jefferson's Manual, it would be a lot. And if you were to apply all those words and think the House operates in the way those words say, you would be completely wrong. Because as you point out, there are all these unwritten rules that they're workarounds. It's almost as if the exception has become the rule. That's the more typical way of getting things done. I'm talking about procedures like when we suspend the rules or ask for unanimous consent to do something or yield time, or when the House agrees to a special rule to govern the terms of debate and the amendment process. Those sorts of things, when we're repeatedly setting aside the normal rules and imposing some other process on top of it. I can give you an example in committee markups, which is when a committee meets to offer amendments to a bill. The rule is that the bill has to be read. It's in its entirety. The rule is that amendments can only be offered by section, to the section that's currently being read. But the practice is that almost inevitably the chair starts the markup by saying, without objection, the bill shall be considered as read, and amendments may be offered at any point. And it happens so fast, it happens in the blink of an eye. And suddenly all the rules went out the window. And at the end of the markup, the chair might say that without objection, the staff are authorized to make technical and conforming changes. Or there used to be a chair, I recall, who would say something even more abstract. He would say the bill is ordered to be reported with the usual instructions. Now, what were the usual instructions? They weren't written down anywhere. You had to have a vague sense of what he was talking about. But the interesting point is these workarounds, these unwritten conventions, they're like the grease that makes the machine work. You could ask yourself, well, why don't they replace the rules? Why don't we just rewrite the rules to reflect the workarounds? Well, the rules are still important because they're the backstop for things like, for instance, minority rights. I mean, there are times when members do insist on reading the bill and following the normal rules. But the workarounds help things to happen because, again, as I mentioned before, it's a human process. I mean, ultimately, procedure is not about rules. Procedure is actually about people and relationships. And to the extent the rules are getting in the way, there need to be these mechanisms for people to reach agreement, consensus. And the way that you advance the digital technology to ensure these conventions are not lost is to be sure you include the subject matter experts, the people who are familiar with the process. Make sure we're not throwing out the baby with the bathwater, as we say. Keep the things that are working, even if they don't always seem logical.
Thank you very much, Warren, for your comments. Klaus, would you like to share your thoughts on this question as well?
Yes, thank you. Yes, you said in Parliament there are traditions, and last year we celebrated the 75th anniversary of the Bundesrat because it was founded in 1949. And in these 75 years, a lot of procedures and traditions have been developed, and which have been in practice for decades. And so it's quite a challenge to make something new, to revise these long-loved traditions. And so when the first digital tools appeared about 15, 20 years ago, for us the question was, what shall we do? And we said, okay, we cannot adopt things, little piece there, little piece there, because otherwise you have a jigsaw where the parts don't fit together in the end. And we said, we need a strategy. And how develop such a strategy? So we are a very small parliamentary administration with a staff of about 200, from Secretary General to the colleagues in the service. And so we said we set up a steering committee on digitization. It's a relatively small committee. It consists of the Deputy Secretary General, of the 3 Director Generals, of the head of divisions for parliamentary law, IT, but also because this digitization affects the daily working life of all the colleagues, it's the staff council which is represented and also the quality officer who are informed at the earliest time possible. So this committee, new trends are discussed and we decide, shall we adopt it, shall we implement it or not? And once we have decided to implement it, we take care of the procurement process. And what we also do, we make a priority list. So at the moment, we have a list of about 60 projects, measures, which we'd like to tackle in the next years. We cannot do everything at the same time. And so we have to make priorities, which is the most urgent, which are we doing first. And and with this strategy, we have developed some projects in the last years for our administration. For example, one thing was an e-file system, which is working at the moment. We have introduced a speech-to-text solution for the minutes for our plenaries and for our committee meetings. We have a vote counting system based on AI, or we have a vote system for remote committee meetings called VoteBox. These are some projects we have introduced, and but others are still to come. And so that we have made very good experiences with this steering committee. But all in all, it's a classic change management project with all the challenges conceivable. And to tackle these challenges, one thing which is very important here is also transparencies, because inform your staff as early as possible. No secret projects, because rumors will spread. There's something planned, which will lead to fear, criticism, and lack of acceptance in the end. And through this steering committee, we director generals, we transport information into to our heads of divisions and to our staff so that they are informed as early as possible. And to give you an example, for when we introduced the e-file system 10 years ago, we had a big event for the whole staff of our administration where we said openly, we are planning this, an e-file system. A lot of things will change and it will need some work. You will need leave your comfort zone, but in the end, it will be much better for you and it make your work easier. So communicate it, be transparent, be open. That's very important. One thing is the system you create must present a high degree of usability. So it should not be too difficult to learn or to use. It should have a user-centered design and therefore participate future users into the development of this solution. So that's what we did on the e-file system. That's what we did on the speech and the system for the creating the minutes, speech-to-text solution. And that was very important. Work in small groups, very efficient. These working groups presented their results to the steering committee and to the staff of the Bundesrat as a whole. The new system should be consistent and intuitive for users. And one very important point is accessibility. Accessibility for colleagues with disabilities, which is very important for the acceptance of these solutions. And the last thing is offer training on new technologies. Don't leave your staff alone. And because once the digital tool is introduced, problems will arise. And there, to give you one example, when we introduced this e-file system, we established a task force e-file in our IT department with a hotline. You can call them anytime you need something, there's a problem, they solve the problem immediately, come to your office and settle it. And so this project has been running for 5 years now, and we are very happy about it. And so it can be a model for future projects on digitization. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Klaus, for your comments on this question. Marty, would you like to comment on this issue as well?
Yeah, I'll back up I think transparency when it comes to confidence and continuity is of the utmost importance. This is a change management problem, so this is a very human problem. And we need to establish trust because we are not just dealing with the importance of democracy and the rule of law. We're also dealing with people's jobs. And anytime in any situation, if it's a marketing organization or a small business or one of our cherished democratic institutions, if you start talking about changing people's jobs, they get nervous and they don't feel safe. So, and when people don't feel safe, they don't collaborate, and you don't end up with good output. So you need to focus on building trust. That's done through transparency. There shouldn't, like Klaus said, there should be no secret projects. Everything should be out in the open. Change is scary, and you have to hit it head on. You can't wait and do change management at the end of a project. So, I think one of the most important things that we help our customers with, and I've seen this throughout my career, is you need to engage users, you need to engage stakeholders right from the beginning of large projects, get them informed and listen to them. And you need to be able to listen and not just take their input, but they need to understand if you're going to use their input or disregard their input. We're dealing with adults. They can handle the truth. So you need to tell them, be able to answer all of the questions in a truthful way and let them make their decision if they trust what's going on here or not. If you don't make adjustments to their feedback, trust erodes in these projects very quickly. And I would also, we use a technique that we call the 5 whys, which is you question people, you keep asking why, and you invite other people, the constituents, the users, to ask you whys as well. Keep digging, ask them to get to the root of you want to find out the root of their distrust, but also the root of the problems that they're experiencing so you can make this system serve them better. So dig deep, listen, and be willing to change. And so as someone coming from the tech space, I think that the conventions that Warren described are the types of conventions that we'd like to protect. But when we work with different jurisdictions and we start to listen to users, it's not often clear to us which of these are institutional traditions and which of these are personal preferences. And those do creep in. And in the tech space, we would describe that, and especially in Silicon Valley, and when we talk about in the innovation sector, we use a term that we call that corruption. It's not corruption in the legal sense. It's corruption of innovation. It's corruption of doing something new and creating value because we're paying attention to things that we should disregard, and we're over listening to power structures that should potentially be broken down. So it's really important to understand the difference between those personal preferences and the way that people prefer to work from what is important to protect for the institution. And you have to do that by listening to a multitude of people and having that trusted partner within the legislature who can help you make those understand which is which. You do not want to end up with a system that replicates the way that people worked in the past. If that is your objective, then you might as well not do it. The objective of new systems is to create new value for people and to move the institutions forward. So that involves building that trust so they adopt it, but also listening with fresh ears, starting with blank pieces of paper, and preserving the things that should be preserved.
Thank you very much, Marty, for your comments as well. Paulo, would you like to comment your thoughts on this issue?
Yes, here in Brazil, we have a very curious situation. In Brazilian legal system, we have a prevalence of written rules, since our country inherits a legal system based on civil law, not in common law. But Brazilian Parliament is different. Here in Brazilian Parliament, we have a famous saying: the written rules are a gentleman's agreement to be used only when a gentleman cannot agree. In Brazilian Senate, there's even a written rule that allows the occasional overcoming of any procedure rule by agreement of parties' leaders. But of course, the written rules are very important. They are the baseline that indicates how far you do divert sometimes. When we have to deal with these written conventions, I believe there are 4 aspects we must keep in mind. The first is to map these conventions just like we do formal procedures. To do this, as Marty said, we must listen to everybody, to learn the leadership, to long-serving members, to clerks, and everybody that understands the why behind each practice. Second, what is very important, and Maury also said this. We have to distinguish what is essential from what is incidental. and what is personal preference, in Marty's words. So we have to validate which unwritten conventions should be translated to digital procedures in order to build consensus. With that consensus, we come to the third aspect we must keep in mind, that is transparency and trust. This digital transformation should be perceived not as something that is imposed by outside, but something that is cultivated inside the organization. When during the COVID pandemic, here in Brazil, we were forced to adopt a remote deliberation system. And this was a very an episode very full of lessons. We learned that technology could be introduced without compromising confidence in the process, but only if conventions were respected. And so before we built the remote system, we had our leadership and technical teams agreed on how to protect debate time, voting rights, visibility of party positions, and space for negotiation. So since we observed these unwritten conventions, the system was adopted with success. And the last thing I would like to appoint is the institution should create a safe space for experimentations in small scale. So pilot environments, shadow simulations, and some initiatives to experience how conventions translate into the digital practice. So we must treat the unwritten conventions with the same respect as written rules, so we can perform a good digitalization of the procedure.
Thank you very much, Paulo, for your comments on this. And allow me to bring my next question to you. As you mentioned, in shaping a digital legislative process, institutions face difficult choices. What aspects of the legislative process should be digitized first? What should be deliberately analog or not digital? And who should lead this effort, balancing the technical design with the procedure and political authority? So, in your thoughts, how can these decisions can be structured to ensure both the legitimacy and coherence in the process? And of course, feel free to share any examples to illustrate this.
The innovative solutions may have different origins. It could be a suggestion from the IT department to replace obsolete technology. It might be an idea from the clerks and legislative advisors to increase efficiency and reduce errors. It can be a demand from the members and the leadership. Regardless of this origin, all these ideas should be validated by the Parliamentary Steering Committee, just like any other project. After that, we should assign the members of the project teams that will conduct this, and involving all the departments that could be affected by these solutions. And in other words, we should adopt shared governance, not isolation. So this model should involve Parliament authorities, non-partisan technical and legislative experts, and technology specialists that can translate principles into system architecture. Here in Brazilian Senate, most of our IT solutions are developed by our IT department. We have a very robust IT department here, so they have more than 50 years of creation, So even the technical experts, the IT technical experts, they understand the legislative process. So it's very valuable to us. When we have to acquire some third-party solutions, they are able to choose correctly because they have this, even the technical, they have this experience with the legislative process. About the strategies you can adopt to decide what to digitize first, I believe you should prioritize process that enhance transparency, traceability, and institutional integrity without affecting the core political dynamics. So what is already consensual, we should decide first. So, for example, virtual control of legislative drafts, tracking of amendments, automatic publication of official documents, some things like that. Now, what should deliberately remain analog? I believe, as we all said previously, we could indicate those spaces of human discretion that are essential to democratic life. So any procedure step that protects minority rights and debate time, the flexibility, sometimes we need to reach consensus. All of this should be remain analog as much as we could. For example, here at the Brazilian Senate, the distribution of bills to the committees is decided by the president of the Brazilian Senate, even though it could be done automatically with the aid of an artificial intelligence tool. So we have the bill draft, the system could analyze the text and suggest the committees. But at the end, the decision is always political. So we should keep that in mind. So this transformation is not a race to modernize everything at once. We should separate, distinguish what we should decide first and what we should keep for a second moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paulo, for your thoughts on this question. I'd like to invite Warren to share his thoughts. Warren?
Yes, well, first off, I agree with everything Paulo just said very eloquently. I liked his remarks about how you need so many stakeholders at the table to be able to make a technical advance because it requires all sorts of knowledge. But I also like to remark that at the end of the day, you need political ratification of these decisions because the process is democracy and has a big effect on the output of our legislatures. So you don't want the technocrats wholly in control, even if they may be the experts on the technology. Ultimately, you do need your elected officials in order to give these changes the imprimatur of democratic buy-in. That's how you build trust within a society. Turning to the question of which changes should be made first, what should be digitized first, there I think I would skip back to the first question you asked, Luís, about what are the principles and values that should not be lost, and you use those principles and values as your guiding star. And the changes that seem to be consistent with those principles and values, or those are the ones you can charge ahead with, and the ones that are most challenging to those principles and values, those are the ones that should give us the most pause. To take an example from the COVID pandemic, which we're also unfortunately familiar with, our legislatures were forced to make all sorts of technological innovations to get through that difficult period. One in the US House of Representatives was something called the e-hopper. Until COVID, in order to introduce a bill, a member had to take a piece of paper, with a wet signature, walk it down to the House floor, and put it into a wooden box called the hopper. That was the only way you could introduce a bill. You can still do that today, but during COVID, we also developed the alternative process of introducing a bill electronically. And this process has stuck around. It remains popular even now. Why? Because I personally don't see any conflict between the convenience that comes from being able to introduce a bill online, maybe without a wet signature. It's not imposing really on any of those principles and values that we talked about earlier. Meanwhile, here's another thing that changed during COVID. All of our committees went to online markups. They were meeting virtually on Zoom or whatever other platform. Now that's gone. We went back to in-person markups. Why? Because there was a perception that something was lost. The human component of the interactions wasn't fully there in fully online committee proceedings. There was a value to having people see each other in person, especially when they disagree and when they're really, really struggling to find common ground. There was a value to having them in the same room talking about things. So that's an example of sometimes the technology goes too far, and then you have to dial it back for the sake of democracy. So I would say you always want the technology to augment the sort of key human component within the process, not to replace it, not to automate it. You want the technology to serve the key principles and values of legislative process with humans always in the loop, in control of the decision-making process.
Thank you very much, Warren, for your comments on this as well. Marty, would you like to share your thoughts?
Yeah. Talk about legitimacy and coherency. I think that Warren's comments about the e-hopper, I think make a really strong point, which is that when you do digital transformation, we often think about replacing old systems, but that doesn't always have to be the case. And one way to build confidence in leadership's decisions about what to engage in, it's often very wise to do projects that don't ask people to change the way that they work, but instead add value by adding a service. So one example of this is we partnered with the clerk's office in the U.S. Congress to build a comparative tool to compare bill texts. That did not replace or interfere with an existing process. It simply added a new tool that folks could utilize and get value out of. So we didn't ask anyone to change the way they work. We just gave them a new tool to create value that was aligned to transparency and understanding what people were actually voting on. I do think it's always important when you think about when you get to the point where you have to replace systems and you're starting to think about new tech, to start at the heart of the organization. So in tech, we were sometimes refer to these systems of record, but what is the most important system? And you don't need to replace that system first, but you need to have a design and have that project thought through, because so many other systems will key off of or relate to those core systems. So always address the heart of the work first. In parliaments, I think it's easy to argue that that is the rule of law and legislation, and collaboration and lots of other things contribute to that and make it more valuable and make it more trustworthy. But taking care of the text of the law itself is you need to have a plan for that. And everybody on this panel has done that by investing in open standards and formats and schemes that will make these laws not only interoperable, but easier to understand, more structured, and to outlive the systems that are currently in place and the tech that's currently in place. One thing that I think I see some governments doing that I believe is extremely valuable are publishing strategic modernization plans. So this requires, and it is evidence of strategic thinking and prioritization and understanding what's important, what are we going to do first, how does everything work? If you want to get confidence in an organization that your leadership is going to succeed, you need to show them that you have thought strategy. You're not reactionary, you're planning things out, and you have a plan, and people can see that plan and can comment on that plan. So those strategic plans, I think, are not only valuable for the citizens, and as a citizen, I appreciate those, but I think that they directly relate to change management. I'll make three quick points on change management because I still think that this is directly related to legitimacy. One thing I've learned over the years is that change management has to come from the top. Like I said before, whenever we say we're going to change the way that people work, they get nervous and it feels like an existential threat to their safety, to their livelihood, to can they support their family. You are threatening their jobs whenever you say that you're going to redo how things operate. There is safety in that coming from the top. So the boss, whoever that is in an individual's life, needs to be bought into the change. If they are not vocal about buying into change, the users won't change because there's more safety in sticking with the boss than sticking with a plan that may or may not work out, right? So we are all social animals and we cue off of those who can affect our livelihood. I think that some of the most successful projects that we've done, we have a very successful project going on in Oregon right now. And part of that success is what Paulo talked about. We have a very diverse steering committee that gets input from different groups. And so they've got leadership across different organizations that relate to the drafting system. And we report, as a vendor, we report to that steering committee and get their feedback, keep them updated, listen to their concerns, and that helps with change management as well. So I think not only do steering committees, I would demand as a vendor some form of a steering committee to make sure that the project is successfully adopted once it's put in place. The other thing I'll say about legitimacy is that you have to be correct about the technology. Technology is fairly binary. Some applications can do certain things and are really good, and then they fail pretty harshly at other things. And we've seen, so be right about the tech. It's not hard to do, but if you are wrong about tech, you lose legitimacy of transformation and of the projects. And it will be tough to win that back. So you want to have that moral authority when it comes to technology because it is within reach and it is inexcusable not to be. And then the last thing I'll just go back to is that active listening. You have to keep listening. You have to listen to the steering committee. You have to listen to the users, and you have to adjust. And yeah, I also agree with everything else has been said. It's fantastic.
Thank you very much, Marty, for your comments. Klaus, would you like to share your thoughts on this question as well?
Yes, thank you, Luís. So I'd like to answer this question by presenting you one of the biggest digitization projects we are currently facing in Germany at the moment. And this project is called e-legislation. And the aim of this project is the complete digitization of the legislative process on the federal level, meaning from draft to promulgation. And this will happen on a digitally supported platform where all the players involved, and this is quite a number of players, this is the federal government, meaning the Chancellor, 17 federal ministries, 2 parliamentary organs, Bundestag, Bundesrat, then it's 16 federal states who are represented in the Bundesrat, who can initiate legislation, who can present amendments to current legislation, and the federal president for the signing and promulgation. So quite a multitude of players on this platform, but they can all work together across departments in a single system, in a seamless process. And this is a challenge. It's a challenge also because all these players, they sometimes have develop their own digital systems, their own solutions, they have invested money, and these processes must be made interoperable because they don't fit together at the moment. Then there's the challenge, we have to change legal requirements because we have to amend the constitution, we have to amend the rules of procedure because they still are in the analog world. They are not, have not already arrived in the digital world, and they have to make them fit for the future. And it's parliamentary traditions, unwritten parliamentary law, traditions which have to be reformed. We have to reach the conscience of the parliamentarians and the parliamentary staff. And then it's also budgetary questions, because we have enough money for the system in the federal budget, but for example, the 16 federal states, they are not included into the federal budget. They have their own budgets. And so if we want to come them on or to join the platform, they might argue and say, okay, we have invested a lot of money in our own systems, and now you ask us to join this platform, so please then you pay for it. Or they might say, okay, we have our system, it's not interoperable with the federal system, so we send you our documents, our proposals for draft bills in our format, and you have to transform it into the format that will be used in this e-legislation process. So these are quite a lot of challenges which we're going to tackle. We started the project about 5 years ago, and this project has also to map the very complex legislative process in Germany. It is very complicated because, just to sum it up in a nutshell, draft bill is elaborated by the federal government. It's passed by the cabinet. Then we have a first passage in the Bundesrat. We have a passage in the Bundestag, which adopts the bill or rejects it. And then we have a second passage in the Bundesrat, and then the promulgation of the bill, and perhaps a mediation procedure for a compromise. So a very long procedure. And when we started the project, we hired an external company which is consulting us, and because we cannot do it on our own, and we tried to identify procedures and documents. And alone for the Bundesrat procedure, we identified 100 different types of documents throughout the procedure who have to be mapped and integrated into this process. And then imagine this multitude of players from the federal government, from both parliamentary organs and from the federal states. It leads up to more than 1,000 documents, maybe. And so you see the complexity of the process. And then I'm coming back to Luís' question. Luís asked which parts should be digitized first. So some things can be digitized autonomously by the single players, by parliaments, by the Bundesrat. So things we did, for example, I already mentioned them, where, for example, document e-file system, this speech text solution, voting procedures in the parliament. So these can be prepared autonomously by the parliaments or by the players. But all the rest, you have to take a comprehensive approach, and you cannot start with isolated digital solutions, a little bit there, a little bit there, because it will not fit together in the end. And so we decided that as long as we are in the project phase, when we are working on this big project, everything will more or less remain as it is, mostly still analog, but we are planning to start this whole project as a whole by the end of next year, at the end of 2026. So come back to a question. No isolated solutions first, no things, or mostly no things digitized first, but we see the project as a whole as a very complex procedure, and we set it in motion hopefully by the end of next year.
Thank you very much, Klaus, for your comments on this and for sharing the legislation case. That's absolutely interesting. And allow me to bring to you, Marty, our closing question for today's panel. That after identifying these key principles, conventions, and priorities, as you have shared, for transforming them within a digital legislative process, how can these elements be translated into concrete parameters for system design and architecture? I'll draw from one of your considerations when you mentioned about user experience. How can you explain to a user experience developer these concrete parameters? And once that translation begins, should the objective be to be faithful and to replicate faithfully the existing processes into digital form? Or, as I was sharing at the beginning of our panel, is there room to reinterpret and adapt it to the new environment? Marty, would you like to share your thoughts on this?
Maybe I might get in trouble. But yeah, I would say when we think about digital parameters, I think I'm going to take a guess that Claus is using a Komenatoso and AKN for EU. And I would say when we think about legislation, one of the first things we need to think about is open standards, because we've moved away from paper, we've moved away from vellum, right, which is designed to last hundreds of years. We need something that will last hundreds of years into the future. And open standards are not vendor specific. They don't require vendors. We need to have formats for our legislation that will last when our vendors go out of business. I would also say that as a organization, it's important to own. I'm a believer that the government should own all of their source code. I don't think it's reasonable to ask them to have all of the capabilities that they might find in vendors, because that's not necessarily the expertise, but they should own everything, because all of these vendors that we're utilizing today will be long gone, and these institutions and these laws will last well beyond not just the implementations that we have today, but the vendors that help put these in place. So we need long-term solutions that outlast our current situations. And I think when that's specifically important relative to document formats and document types and machine readable and human readable formats that the next version of computers can read. I think one parameter that if I would hope that governments would pay attention to is don't get caught up in fads coming out of Silicon Valley. Crypto was a big problem. That was fraudulent from the beginning. You can't control scarcity through tech and expect that to be a legitimate thing. There's been a lot of hype around AI. There are limitations to what it can do and what it should be used for, and we should be very careful. I think that outside of those, it's not the job of the vendor to protect the way that these conventions. Like I said before, we don't know which ones are meaningful and support the institution and which ones are personal preference and just short-term traditions based on the technology that was being used, right? Like we still do amendments oftentimes based on the way the printing press was set up. And that doesn't exist anymore, right? So we don't have to pay attention to, maybe we don't need to do amendments as, delete this letter in this line anymore because that's not necessary. So I do think if we want to create value, we want to support the values of the institution and pay close attention. But we should not over listen to and try to replicate existing systems. We should be willing to combine roles and to automate things that don't need human intervention. Every time we leave human intervention in place, we're leaving opportunity for error in place. So we need to think digital and think how can we reduce opportunities for errors, not how we replicate the way that people are working today. And again, that goes back to needing that partner inside the legislature. As a vendor, I need a trusted partner who will help me determine the difference between those. I can't do it on my own. But yes, I will reemphasize that, there has been, I've been in the startup space in my whole career, and I often think about all of the wonderful technology that has been thrown away because startups go out of business. And mostly that's because users don't adopt it. They're not interested in for whatever reason. So we have to pay attention to what do they want to use? What will make them happy? We need happy users. Happy users do good work. They're more productive. They get things done the right way. So at the end of the day, the tech serves the people, and the users need to determine what their interfaces look like and what makes their job more productive because people find satisfaction in that. So we don't force tech on people. We listen, but we also need to be, I think, extremely focused it should be one of our philosophies that open technology, open source code, everything should be open in the government space because we can't let the Silicon Valley in particular, but tech in general are not trustworthy partners. We are profit driven, and it's the customer's job, and in this case, the government's job to protect themselves and the people, the citizens, from the tech players by demanding open technologies, demanding open source code, and demand that they listen to those conventions and protect them.
Thank you very much, Marty, for your comments. Warren, would you like to share your thoughts on this?
Yes, thank you. So far in my remarks today, I would say I have tended to be more cautionary in terms of speaking about legislative digital technology advancing. In answer to this question, I would like to shift gears and be more of an optimist and tell you a story about my personal experience with technology. Back when I started, we, the legislative drafters at Legislative Council, were having a lot of meetings with our clients, meaning predominantly staff, maybe members, in our conference rooms. And one thing I noticed over the years was that attorneys started to do less of that. They started to do more by email. They started to meet in person less. And there's a lot that was going on in those conference rooms besides strictly drafting. There was also client relationship building. There was also client education. We were actually, by working so closely with the staff, we were teaching them how to read the bill. We were teaching them why we're asking the questions we're asking. We were giving them an appreciation for the value of good legislative drafting. And I started to worry that some of this is getting lost because we're having fewer and fewer in-person drafting sessions. Then advance the clock to 2020, January of 2020, we get this new technology, Microsoft Teams. And it's going to give us the capability to meet face-to-face, online, and screen share. Now, we figured this would take several years for my office to adapt to this and really lean into its use. But of course, we all know what happened next. Here comes COVID, months away. And so only in a matter of months, we became experts at meeting on Teams. And you know what? It's worked beautifully for drafting. It really has. What I found is that we began meeting more with our clients by virtue of the convenience of meeting online, face to face, and the screen sharing function actually worked better than the old way of comparing papers across the table or even looking at a big screen on the wall. Screen sharing has been fabulous. So it's an example of the technology actually bringing us back to our roots, actually reinforcing some of the principles and values we talked about earlier. Returning to my cautionary self, you can go too far. You always have to be careful. I know Marty was talking about active listening being an important part of change management. Well, whenever you have a success like this, you also need to keep your ear to the ground for, well, what's not working? We're a nonpartisan office. We rely very heavily on our clients' trust that we are not trying to influence the policy. We're just trying to faithfully express what their policy is. And that's hard to do remotely. I mean, I would say that despite the fact that we can draft through Teams so well, we also have to keep our eye on cultivating our human relationships with our clients, on maintaining our trust. And sometimes that means meeting in person. Sometimes that means, doing things a little more old school. So I would just say this is, again, another example of keeping humans in the loop. It's an experiment in the making. You just always need to be mindful of, is the technology serving these principles and values we keep talking about, or how is it not? How can we dial it back? How should we alter it? Because it can. I think we don't want to be stuck in the process of the 1700s. That would be ridiculous. We want to embrace the new technology, but we want to be also mindful of what the purpose of a legislature is.
Thank you very much, Warren, for your comments on this. Paulo, would you like to share your views on this topic?
Yes. This translation of parliament procedure to digital systems is a very delicate task. I believe the one of the important things we must have in mind is the requirement of the system. The design requirements should reflect our core procedure values. So transparency, minority rights, deliberation, and all kinds of values. What is a value for us? We have to be reflected on explicit design requirements. Sometimes this is difficult to be done because the IT experts, we have something we contract some company from who hasn't the experience of the familiarity with the legislative process. So this is a complicated task. For us here in Brazil, both the national chambers, the Senate and the House of Representatives, they have internal in-house team, the IT team that do this job. So it's easier for us. Second, the system architecture should always establish steps that cannot be skipped without a human act. So we have an example here in Brazil. The bill drafts that transit between the houses, they sometimes they keep in transit between the houses because the president of that house that is receiving the bill draft, he hasn't let's say accepted that bill draft. He has to perform a formal act to, we call it here, to read the bill draft, so it starts to count the term that has to be processed. So despite it's a common digital system, it's everything electronic, but we have to have the intervention of the human, the political member to accept this, to start the process. About the possibility to adapt the procedure when we translate it to digital form, we have one experience here. That is the e-Cidadania project, the electronic citizenship. When we have over the years digitalized the process, it opened the opportunity to allow people to indicate, for instance, if they would approve or reject each bill. And also the citizens can propose ideas for new bills. If these ideas achieve 20,000 signatures from other people, it will be analyzed by one of the Senate committees. If it receives a favorable report, it will become a bill and will be distributed to other committees according to its subjects. So it's something that is not, it was not initially on the written rules, but when we translated it into electronic procedure, this could be it arise this opportunity, and it was interesting. The members thought it was interesting, and now it has it's on the written rules. In summary, this kind of adaptation must be intentional, as any other formal procedure. Innovation should never happen to Parliament. They should be chosen by the Parliament. So I think this is the things I would like to share with you.
Thank you very much, Paulo, for your thoughts. Claus, would you like to share your thoughts and close this question?
Yes, thank you very much. So the first part of the question, how are these parameters translated into the concrete parameters for system design and architecture? Yeah, as Paulo said it, yeah, you can do it on your own with an in-house solution if you have an IT department which has the human resources and the skills. But if you have small parliamentary administrations like we are, there's only a limited degree on how we can develop such solutions on our own. So we have to rely on external experts. And the problem is when you have these external experts, these IT companies, they don't know anything about the legislative process, about your procedures. You have to explain it to them. And this can be quite a challenge because the structure is extremely complex. Then you have staff changes in these companies, and we have experienced that. So that makes it quite a challenge. We have lots of meetings with them 3-4 times a week, then test runs for some parts of the procedures. So that's quite a challenge, but for us, it's the only way to do it. to transport these parameters into the digital procedure. The second part of your question is, in my opinion, I think from a legal or lawyer's point of view, it's important that the legislative process is replicated as exactly as possible in the digital system, because it's legal and constitutional requirements that we have here in Germany, which is very important for us. So we try to map the process, the existing process, as exactly as possible in the digital procedure. But I have to admit there is room for reinterpretation, and there are quite some points where this is possible. For example, document formats, design, layout, for example, with this uniform e-legislation process. The question is, do we use the same layouts for all the players involved, or does everyone have the possibility to use the existing layout where you can recognize a document directly as originating from the federal government or from Parliament? Then it's typefaces, barrier-free access, then the problem of qualified signatures. How are you going to do this? Safe ways of transmission, cybersecurity solutions, who has access to the system, the authorization to make changes, and also documentation. And what we are also thinking about is a backup solution for the time of crisis. For example, if we have a blackout, if the system fails, and then you are a slave of the digital system, and you don't have any paper files anymore giving you a backup. So we have to discuss backup solutions so that we are operable even in times of crisis or whatever may happen. And to sum it up, yes, the digital process should be a replication of the existing process, but with a certain degree of flexibility regarding the practical implementation. So that's from my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Klaus, for your comments as well. It has been a splendid panel, and it was an honor to be your moderator today. We are a little bit beyond our time, but I want to take the opportunity to grant each one of you very briefly 30 seconds to say your farewell message. I'll do this alphabetically, if you permit me. Klaus, would you like to share your final message with colleagues?
Yes, thank you. I think in today's discussion, there were some core elements. The first one was when transforming the legislative process into digital, the human factor has to be preserved, the human in the loop approach that was clear for everyone. I think we can agree that it is a classic change management project and that we have to proceed with sound judgment and caution while taking our staff with us on board. And yes, and the challenges of the actual implementation process, they also depend on each country's governmental and political structure. Yeah, these were the main points, I think, which were visible in all the presentations, in all the contributions we have heard today. And Luís, once again, thank you very much for inviting me on the panel. It was an honor for me being here.
Thank you very much, Klaus, for being here with us. The honor was entirely ours. Marty, would you like to share your farewell message as well?
Yeah, and the honor is absolutely mine. I appreciate being on this panel. It's going to impress my teenage children to no end. And I would say that, I think that the governments are wise. I've seen a lot of folks engaging in these legislative upgrade and digitization situations. And as a citizen, I've gained a lot of over the last few years, a lot of appreciation for the structure and the pace at which these projects are approached. And I would just simply encourage that. Don't move fast. move deliberately, choose open technologies, and think beyond the current vendors, think out into the future. And the last thing I would say is pay attention to where these technologies are going. Technologies have life cycles, and they typically have an end to their life cycle. Things like open technologies like a Kommilitoso, there are new developments. There are ways to move beyond a Kommilitoso and into other open technologies that also benefit the governments. And so as we look to change what's existing, also keep an eye on the future, because these technologies do have a life cycle. And just want to I appreciate all the comments, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much, Marty, for your comments and for your participation today. It was an honor to have you here. Allow me to invite you, Paulo, to share your final message, a farewell message, very briefly.
Thank you very much for the invitation, Luís. I've learned a lot with this panel. All the contributions of Marty, Warren, and Claus were very important, it means a lot to me. And one final message I'd like to transmit is the digital transformation in parliaments is not about technology, it's about democracy. So we should adopt technology where it strengthens our work. This task must be led by the parliament itself, and of course supported by technical expertise. But digitalization should not replace politics. But should renew it and reinforce it for the future. So this is my final message.
Thank you very much, Paulo, as well, for your participation. It was an absolute pleasure to have you here today with us. And last but not least, I wanted to invite Warren, my dear friend, to share your final message with us as well. Warren.
Well, tomorrow is my favorite holiday, the very American tradition of Thanksgiving. I'm wearing my Thanksgiving tie, where we gather with our families and loved ones around the table to eat turkey and cranberry sauce and pumpkin pie and to give thanks. So today I would like to give thanks to, well, first off, the fact that we have legislatures and legislative processes to work out all the disagreements, strongly held disagreements across big, complex societies. And secondly, that we have innovators who are bringing new technologies to these old traditions to try to make things go even better. People who are optimistic enough to give that a try. And third, I would like to give thanks to people like my fellow panelists and everyone participating who are approaching this with caution and with wisdom, and who are listening every step of the way, because we know it's going to be, 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. This is going to take a lot of experimentation in order to get it right. And it's people like this, I think, who are going to be key to making that happen. So happy Thanksgiving, everyone.